In the year 1324, a man left his kingdom for a pilgrimage to Mecca. Nothing unusual about that. Thousands of Muslims made the same journey every year. Except this man brought so much gold with him that historians say he crashed the economy of every city he passed through. His name was Mansa Musa, and what happened on his journey, recorded in the chronicles of the Islamic world, reveals a civilization so wealthy, so powerful, so advanced, that the West deliberately erased it from history. This is his story, from the original sources. To understand Mansa Musa, you need to understand what Mali was. In the 13th century, Mali was not a small kingdom. It was an empire. It controlled the entire trans-Saharan gold trade, the richest commodity network in the medieval world. Every ounce of gold coming out of West Africa passed through Mali, every piece of salt coming in from the Sahara, every route between West Africa and the Arab world, between West Africa and Europe, went through Mali. Gold was not scarce in Mali. It was literally everywhere. But here's what Western historians forgot to mention. Mali was not just a gold source, it was a center of Islamic scholarship. Timbuktu had libraries, Janneh had universities. Scholars from Cairo, from Baghdad, from Al-Andalus came to study in Mali. The empire had already been Islamic for over a century. It had already built a sophisticated legal system based on Maliki jurisprudence. In 1312, a man named Musa inherited the throne of Mali, and he decided to do something no one had done before. He decided to build Mali into a center of Islamic learning that would rival Cairo and Baghdad. And he decided to announce it to the entire Islamic world. In 1324, Mansa Musa announced he was going to perform the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca. This wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the size of his entourage. Contemporary accounts from Arab chroniclers who witnessed it describe a caravan of over 60,000 people. Let me repeat that. 60,000 people. The caravan included 12,000 of his personal slaves, each dressed in the finest silk, each carrying gold. 80 camels, each carrying 300 pounds of gold dust. Musicians playing instruments as they marched. Scholars and officials documenting everything. And 40 mules, each carrying 50 pounds of more gold. That's somewhere between 80 and 100 tons of gold in one caravan. Historians recorded that the value of gold in Cairo fell by over 25% during his stay. The Egyptian historian Al-Umari documented this in the 15th century, writing about what happened when Mansa Musa passed through Cairo. He noted the inflation, the disruption, the sheer volume of gold entering the market. Historians recorded that the value of gold in Cairo fell by over 25% during his stay. The Egyptian historian Al-Umari documented this in the 15th century, writing about what happened when Mansa Musa passed through Cairo. He noted the inflation, the disruption, the sheer volume of gold entering the market. From Cairo, Mansa Musa continued to Mecca. In Mecca, he performed the Hajj. He was so generous that he reportedly gave away so much money that when he left, he had to borrow money from merchants to get home. Let that sink in. A man so wealthy that even after spending enough to collapse a city's economy and giving away fortunes in Mecca, he still had to borrow for the journey back. Now here's where the sources matter. One of the few people who actually met Mansa Musa and documented it was a Moroccan traveler named Ibn Battuta. Ibn Battuta spent years traveling through the Islamic world, and in his Rihla, his travel journal, he recorded what he witnessed in Mali. He wrote, "Mali is a land of gold. The people are prosperous, and their houses are built of stone. The Sultan, Mansa Musa, is surrounded by scholars and jurists. This was not legend. This was a contemporary witness account. When Mansa Musa returned from Mecca, he used his remaining fortune to do what he had promised himself. He built. He expanded Timbuktu. He constructed the Jingara Mosque, a university mosque that became one of the greatest centers of Islamic learning in the world. Thousands of students came to study there. He brought scholars from Cairo and the Arab world to teach Maliki jurisprudence, Quranic interpretation, grammar, mathematics, astronomy. He built the University of Timbuktu. It had a library with hundreds of thousands of manuscripts. For the next 200 years, Timbuktu was not just a trading post, it was an intellectual capital. All of this is documented in Arabic sources, in the chronicles of Cairo, in the records of Mecca, in the travel journals of Arab scholars. For 200 years, this was known throughout the Islamic world. Then something changed. In the 16th century, Morocco invaded Mali. The empire fractured. Timbuktu fell. Over the next 400 years, Mali disappeared from the conversation. Not because it stopped existing, it did, but because it stopped existing in European conversation. And when European colonizers arrived in Africa, they had a problem. They needed to justify conquest. They needed to tell a story where Africa had never been civilized, where there had never been powerful African empires, never been learning centers, never been universities or libraries or sophisticated states. If Mali had built universities, if Mansa Musa had created an intellectual capital, if Timbuktu had had libraries rivaling Cairo, then how could they claim Africa was a blank slate waiting to be civilized? So, they erased it. Colonial historians wrote that Timbuktu was a myth, a legend. They claimed Mansa Musa was apocryphal, a story told by Muslim merchants, not a real person. In school textbooks across Europe and America, Mali was forgotten. The gold trade was reframed as something that happened to Africa, not something Africans controlled. Mansa Musa disappeared. And for 300 years, Western education taught that Africa had no empires, no cities, no scholars, no learning. The sources were still there. The Arabic chronicles were still there. Ibn Battuta's account was still there. The manuscripts in Timbuktu were still there. But they weren't being read. They weren't being taught. They weren't being translated. It wasn't until the late 20th century that Western scholars finally went back to the sources. They opened Ibn Battuta's travel journal. They read the records from Cairo. They examined the manuscripts that had survived in Timbuktu's libraries. And they realized everything the Muslim historians had written was true. Mansa Musa was real. Mali was a real empire. Timbuktu had a real university. The gold was real. The wealth, the learning, the sophistication, it was all documented, not by Western historians, but by the people who were actually there. It wasn't until the late 20th century that Western scholars finally went back to the sources. They opened Ibn Battuta's travel journal. They read the records from Cairo. They examined the manuscripts that had survived in Timbuktu's libraries. And they realized everything the Muslim historians had written was true. Mansa Musa was real. Mali was a real empire. Timbuktu had a real university. The gold was real. The wealth, the learning, the sophistication, it was all documented, not by Western historians, but by the people who were actually there. Mansa Musa was not just a wealthy man. He was a ruler who understood something crucial, that gold means nothing without legacy, that power without learning dies with you. He took the richest commodity in the medieval world and spent it to build a center of Islamic scholarship that lasted 2 centuries. He created a space where African and Arab scholars could study together, where knowledge could be preserved. And then, deliberately, that legacy was hidden. Not lost, hidden. That is what erasure means. It's not that history forgot Mali, it's that history was rewritten to exclude it. The sources are there. They always were. Al-Makrizi documented it. Ibn Battuta witnessed it. The manuscripts survived it. This channel is about recovering those sources, about reading the primary documents, about telling the history that was deliberately erased. And there are dozens more stories like Mansa Musa's. Empires no one taught you about, cities you never heard of, scholars whose work shaped the Islamic world but never made it into Western textbooks. If you want to recover that history, to learn from the people who were actually there, subscribe. History didn't forget them, it erased them. Now we're remembering.